unspoken agreements are not agreements, they're assumptions. And in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, the practice that I use, that's called a mind read. And a mind read is where you suppose that you know what somebody else is thinking, but you don't check it out. You assume that you know what somebody meant to say or was meaning, but you don't verify it. So one of the things that we recommend in NLP is specific language. So you might say to someone, if you were in a conversation and you had what we call a mind read, you might say, when you said that, I think you meant this. Am I right? That would just be verifying that what you mind read was actually true, was actually what was intended in the other person's speech. Because in neuro-linguistic programming, you're literally reprogramming or repatterning the thinking process and the sequence and order of how they process a reality based on language. That's the linguistic part, neuro-linguistic programming. So your language must be very specific, and you cannot assume that somebody knows what you're talking about. Same is true in relationships, whether they're a short-term recreational relationship. Notice that I was very specific about how I articulated short-term, meaning it's not for a lifetime, it's for a short time. A short time could be 6 weeks, 6 months, 9 weeks, 3 years, but it's still a short term. Recreational means, hey, we're here to enjoy ourselves, to have fun, to recreate. Okay, recreation means to recreate. So when you go on a vacation to have some recreation, you're literally recreating yourself. You're building yourself back up. You're letting old things go. You're creating newly, new energy, new insights, new desires, new motivations to move forward. So recreational means exactly that. And so a short-term recreational relationship is for the purpose of practicing your relationship skills, getting better at whatever it is that you do, whatever it is that you have or bring to the table or offer, that you get better at that, that you improve that. Excuse me. A lot of people make the mistake these days, and I suppose they always have, of entering into a short-term recreational relationship and then trying to turn that relationship into a long-term committed relationship. And the likelihood of that happening is very narrow. And I don't say that because I want it to be that way. I say that because it's my observation from dealing with thousands of people now, that, and from having tried to do this myself, that moving from a short-term recreational relationship to a long-term committed relationship, while it may last longer, seldom, if ever, lasts a lifetime. And if it does, then there's a certain amount of suffering involved, and people are actually enduring the relationship by the end of it. So it's like you survived your relationship rather than you were alive all your life and enjoying and being fulfilled in your relationships. So short-term recreational relationships are simply for that. There's no dishonor in that. That can be a perfectly, that could be a relationship that has integrity. Hey, listen, we're only together for a while. Let's enjoy the time that we're together. I'm going to give my best while we're together. You know, I want your best. Let's make the time that we have together be fun, enlightening, enlivening, and enriching. And when it starts to go bad, hey, let's move on. Okay, so that has integrity. It may not be a part of the outspoken, acknowledged Iranian culture. However, it's going on anyhow. It's just unspoken. And because it is unspoken, because everybody's pretending that this is an engagement or this is something else, they're pretending that it has much more meaning and depth and longevity than it actually ever does, then unfortunately, people make the mistake of getting married and having children and then finding out that their short-term recreational relationship was really that, short-term and not very recreational. In fact, it could be quite destructive if you try to turn a short-term recreational relationship into a long-term committed relationship. There's no integrity in it. And what does not have integrity is destined to disintegrate. The word integrate, is in the word disintegrate. If it has no integrity in the first place, it will disintegrate. And that's just a question of time. It's not whether if it will, it's a question of when it will. And so a lot of people spend a lot of time and energy, both in our seminars and workshops, in our private sessions at our office, over the phone, Skype, attempting to repair disintegrating relationships that probably never should have gotten together in the first place in some cases. And in other cases, mostly what it's about, and the reason we're speaking about honor and integrity today, is that good people with good intentions set out with no integrity to create something that requires integrity. It requires honor. It requires giving your word and keeping your word no matter what. It requires a constant growing and developing within oneself. You can't just park yourself, at age 25 and say, okay, I'm done growing, and then by the time you're 45, you wonder why you still have adolescent wants and needs and desires that have never been fulfilled, and now you're frustrated. And then if you're a man, or a woman, really too, you have what they call a midlife crisis. Now, it's rarely a crisis for the person having it. It's usually a crisis for everybody else. A crisis for the people, for their employees or their employer, a crisis for their kids, and a crisis for their wives, and usually a crisis for their bank account as well. Yes, midlife crisis is called a crisis because it causes a breakdown in orderly systems that other people have begun to count upon. So you may find yourself in one of those situations right now. You may find yourself in a situation where you're maybe in your 40s or 50s, and you're going, wow, I've just spent the last 20 years of my life building a business, building a family, building a relationship, and yet I feel empty inside. I feel like there's nothing, the future. If I have to spend another 40 years living like this, if the rest of my life is going to look like this, I don't want it. I find many men in the midlife range that are like that, and many women as well. A lot of people got married too early, and they got married for the wrong reasons. Sometimes the reasons were your family made you do it, or wanted you to do it, or recommended that you do it, or you had social pressure to do it, or because you wanted to get away from your family and this was your way out. There's a lot of reasons that people get married early. But I want to point out something to you in this culture that I've run into a number of times. And, it's not just the Iranian culture, but, the American culture as well, however, less so. And that is that your brainstem, your nervous system, and your brain, your bones, you're not done growing until you're in your early to mid-20s. And for men, it's more like in your later 20s, like 27 or so, okay? You're still not even an adult yet until you're in your mid to later 20s. And to assume the position of being an adult and being in charge of children and their future is irresponsible as far as I'm concerned. It has no integrity. And to have integrity, from my viewpoint, would be to do everything possible to assure that if you're going to be responsible for somebody else's life and all of the many lives that they will touch, that you make sure you win. You make sure that the cards are stacked in your favor. And that doesn't mean that mom and dad's backing you with a good bank account, or that you've got some half-finished degree in your pocket that you just graduated from. No, it means that you know that you have the resources and the wherewithal, not just financially, but mentally, spiritually, emotionally, that you are prepared to deal with whatever life will throw at you, and that you have a very good chance of winning whatever those struggles are. Now, it doesn't mean that you won't win every battle that you fight. You know, nobody knows that they'll win every battle that they fight, but you have mastered your life enough to know that you have a very good chance of being successful, both as a husband and a wife, because you've spent some time together, and you've seen that, well, not only have you got a capacity to work things out, but that you're going to continue to develop that capacity, because that's another thing that happens in relationships. I see it happening all the time, where one person wants to grow and develop and do seminars and workshops and continue growing for their entire life, and the other person is kind of like, no, I'm done, I'm not interested in that, and they stay stuck, and then they begin to hold the other person back. The other person's always sort of dragging them to seminars or workshops, or trying to get them to go to therapy or read a book or something. But they go, no, not interested in that, that's for you, go ahead. And then the gap between them becomes so vast that, yes, of course, naturally, eventually it will break down. The relationship will break down, and the communication will break down. The affinity, the love, the affection for each other begins to break down. And so eventually they find themselves living in two separate realities. And when you're living in two separate realities from the person that you're married to, the chances of you having an affair, the chances of you going elsewhere to try to find some happiness or joy or fulfillment in your life is increased exponentially. Anyhow, there's callers that are starting to call in. I'm going to go ahead and take some calls.